Welcome everyone to Around the World to Scotland. I'm Sheila Budoff with Arlington County 55 Plus program, and I am delighted to welcome you to this program. I am so excited to find out about Scotland, which is on my list of places to go. I can't wait. This program is being recorded and will be posted on the 55 Plus YouTube channel at a later date. Our speaker will be spotlighted so that she'll be the only one who appears in the recording. You're viewing this program through the Virtual Center for Active Adults, or VCAA. VCAA is a platform of Northern Virginia, it's a partnership of Northern Virginia jurisdictions that provide free virtual programming for older adults and adults with disabilities in our area. Before we get started, I would like to, first of all, thank Ashley Gomez Figueredo, who is the Lubber Run 55 Plus Center Director, for making it possible for us to have this program offer this program in hybrid format, and for hosting a nice group at Lubber Run 55 Plus Center. Thank you so much, Ashley, for making this possible. Also, very special thanks to Becky Norris. She is the Project and Events Manager for the Scottish Government USA, which is part of the British Embassy. Thanks to Becky for making this all possible, for making all the arrangements, and I'm very, very grateful to you for all that you've done. Thank you so very, very much. This is such a treat, and it's going to be delightful. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker. I'm really very honored that she's made time to speak with us today. Our speaker is Ailie McKinnon. She is the deputy head of the Scottish Government USA. The Scottish Government's USA office is based within the British Embassy right here in Washington, D.C. The office promotes Scotland's interests through political, cultural, and economic diplomacy. Before becoming deputy head of the office, Ailie participated in the 4-year Scottish Graduate Development Program. And through her participation in the program, she's held several really exciting positions in the Scottish government. I'm very jealous of these positions. They sound fascinating. She's been a researcher and parliament assistant in the Scottish Parliament, which I think would be fabulous. She holds an MA with honors, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sure, from Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh. Her master's is in language interpretation and translation, and she speaks many languages. We're going to leave time at the end for Q&A. You are most welcome to enter your questions in the chat as we go along. But we'll hold them until the end and then read them. Also, if you prefer not to use the chat function or raise hand function, that's just fine. We'll give you an opportunity to unmute yourselves and just ask away. And that goes for people at Lubber Run as well. Ashley is going to be monitoring the questions and facilitating and repeating everyone's questions so that we can hear them. So that's enough of me. You certainly did not come to hear me speak. I am going to turn the program over to Ailie McKinnon.
Thank you so much, Sheila, and good morning, everyone. My name's Ailie. I'm Deputy Head of the Scottish Government's USA office, and this is the wonderful Bex who helped put together today's session. So thank you all so much for your interest and enthusiasm for learning about Scotland. I am busking a wee bit while I make sure that you can all see my slides, which I hope you now can. And I'll kick off. Perfect. Thank you, Sheila, for letting me know. So yeah, I'm just going to kick off by saying a wee bit more about the Scottish Government in the USA, although Sheila did a brilliant job of summarising that for me. So the Scottish government has had a presence here in the USA since 2001. And I have been with the team for just about a year and a half. I arrived in June 2023. But we've been here for nearly 25 years. And as Sheila said, we have a pretty varied remit across cultural diplomacy, supporting cultural exchange between Scotland and the US. We engage at a federal level with the administration. We engage with the Friends of Scotland caucus between the House and the Senate side. And we also seek to promote trade and investment in Scotland. Now, having said all that, you might be surprised to see that we are a team of just 4 people. So we have 2 diplomats from Scotland, of which I am one, and we also have 2 wonderful country-based staff who help us deliver on the ground. So between that small team of 4, we cover all those interests across the whole of the USA. All that to say is that it's a real privilege to do this job, and it also keeps us very busy. Now, sometimes when you're here in DC or you're out in the world, probably more especially when we travel to places which aren't as familiar with the sort of diplomatic corps as Washington, DC, people can get confused. So you work for the Scottish Embassy, is that a real thing? And I'm here to say that there is indeed no such thing as a Scottish Embassy. Scotland is not at present an independent country. It's one of the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. So that would be Scotland to the north here, England to the south, Wales to the west of England. And over here you have Northern Ireland. So that would be what we call the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom has its own government and its own parliament. So we are a part of that. If someone refers to Great Britain, what they're referring to is this collection of islands. So that would include Ireland, the Republic as well. Sorry, I've just messed that up. Great Britain is just the island. So that's Scotland, Wales, and England. Now, if someone refers to the British Isles, that is the collection of islands. So that's more a sort of geographic terminology than a political one. So to say a wee bit more about the geography of Scotland in particular, for such a small nation, we have an incredibly varied geography. So we've got everything from the sort of lush green plains which support our agricultural sector. We've got the sort of barren mountains which have served as, the backdrop for some iconic films, which we might talk about later. And we're also home to nearly 800 islands. And actually most of those are not inhabited at all. Maybe they were in the past, but now I think only around 80 of our islands are actually inhabited. So we obviously share a border with England to the south, as I mentioned, but we're otherwise bounded by the Atlantic Ocean to the north and west, and then the North Sea to the east and to the north, and reaching across to Denmark and Scandinavia. So you're never really too far from the sea in Scotland, which growing up in Scotland was a real highlight, to be honest. But it's not all sort of, barren moors, Highland mountains. There are some relatively densely populated areas, and that area is known as the Central Belt. So that's where you'll find most of our cities, including the capital, which is Edinburgh, we've got a lovely picture of that at sort of twilight time up top. So Edinburgh is our capital city. And then pictured here with the river, that's Glasgow, which is actually our largest city. Within that sort of Central Belt corridor, you'll also find the city of Stirling and Dundee to the sort of northeast, and the city of Perth, which is known as the gateway to the Highlands. We do have 2 more cities, one of those being Aberdeen, which is pretty far northeast, reaching out into the North Sea. And we also have our newest city, which was Dunfermline, which I believe was confirmed as a city by the King just in the past couple of years. It was historically a city, but I think had sort of lost that status through the years, through the wars, but it's sort of reclaiming it now, and it does actually have a rather grand cathedral if you ever get the opportunity to visit. And I mentioned that Central Belt area. It's not just, well, the reason that it is so densely populated relative to other parts of the country is because that was really the industrial heartland of Scotland during the Industrial Revolution and industrialisation. Scotland, and particularly that region, had large reserves of coal and iron, and sort of industry sort of sprung up around that, and population swelled as people left the rural areas in hopes of a better quality of life. Whether they actually found it, who's to say? And so those industries are really the sort of backbone of modern Scotland as we know it today. Another sort of iconic industry associated with the Central Belt would be the shipbuilding industry. You can see the River Clyde in this picture of Glasgow here. Back in the day, that was really one of the shipbuilding capitals of Europe. Sad to say that that's no longer the case, but it does mean that the Clyde has been sort of regenerated as a more, a place for leisure and enjoyment, which I don't think is a bad thing. So to go back a wee bit into the sort of history of Scotland and some of her national icons, we're lucky enough to enjoy two flags in Scotland. On the left here, we have what I've called the Saltire, but it's really the national flag of Scotland. The Scottish flag can also be known as the Saltire or as the St Andrew's cross. So St Andrew is the patron saint of Scotland, and the story goes that when he was crucified by the Romans, he said that he was not worthy of being crucified, like Jesus Christ was with this sort of cross. And so he ended up being crucified in the sort of X pattern shape that's featured on the flag. And that's how this design came to be known as the Cross of St Andrews. So that is the national flag of Scotland, and you will have seen that in the government's logo as well. But we do also use the flag to the right, which is more of an unofficial flag, and it's known as the Lion Rampant. And it's actually technically the royal standard of the King or Queen of Scotland, which naturally is no longer a title that really exists. So this flag is sort of restricted in its official usage. The government doesn't use it. It's not permitted to be used really in any sort of official capacity, except by the royal family, and it's only used in very specific sort of protocol situations. The people that do use it and celebrate it are Scottish sort of football or rugby fans who are travelling internationally. I think the sort of image of the Lion Rampant, and its fierceness, it's sort of iconography that Scotland supporters really enjoy showcasing when they travel internationally. So that's the story of the Lion Rampant. So I made reference to the fact that flag, represented the royal standard of the King or the Queen of Scots. Not something that exists anymore, and that fact sort of points to our long and pretty complex history, which is, I'm not a historian, I'm a linguist, so I won't claim that I can give you a very exact and detailed history of Scotland, but I can do my best to give you a brief overview. So evidence suggests that Scotland was occupied by mankind as early as the Paleolithic era, or what's known as the Stone Age, and perhaps that's where Nessie or the Loch Ness Monster is still hanging around from. But recorded history and the sort of idea of Scotland as we know it today really began with the Roman Empire. So, once the Romans were occupying Britain, they sought to conquer the area that was Scotland, and which was occupied at the time by two people, the Caledonians and the Picts. And by all accounts, both very sort of fierce people. And despite their best efforts, despite Hadrian's Wall, and despite efforts to sort of shift their occupation north, they were simply never able to conquer Scotland, although it wasn't known as Scotland then. But Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall are still sites that you can visit today and help bring some of that Roman history to life if you ever get the opportunity to visit. But to tell a story of a more successful conquest, we would turn later to the Vikings. So around 800 AD, the Vikings began to migrate from Norway and Denmark and settle particularly in the west of Scotland, so starting with the islands and moving later onto the mainland. At the same time as that was happening to the north and west, the Picts won out against the Caledonians and began to form what came to be known as the Kingdom of Alba, Alba being the Gaelic word for Scotland. So that's really when the Kingdom of Scotland came into its own. Trouble started to arise for the Kingdom of Scotland, or the Kingdom of Alba, particularly in the 13th century with the death of their king Alexander III. And that's the point at which England's monarch, Edward I, saw Scotland at a moment of weakness and saw an opportunity. And he marched north in a series of pretty bloody sieges. And that sort of attempted conquest led to the now famous Battle of Stirling Bridge. And that's the sort of moment in history when William Wallace really won his status as the figurehead of the Scottish Army and has come to be known as a sort of freedom fighter for Scotland. That sort of unrest continued into the 14th century when Robert the Bruce became king, another very well-known man from Scottish history. And that sort of conflict continued until 1314 with another famous battle, the Battle of Bannockburn, and the creation of the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320. And the Declaration of Arbroath was a letter or document drafted in Latin and sent to the then Pope at the time, which sort of declared Scotland an independent sovereign nation. And that's considered one of our most iconic historical artifacts. And it has been said that the Declaration of Arbroath actually inspired the Declaration of Independence. So that's a sort of interesting link between Scotland and the USA. So moving slightly forward in time to another iconic figure from Scottish history. Pictured here, we have Mary, Queen of Scots, a very troubled monarch. Her reign was really marked by religious conflict, civil unrest, and her time actually ended with her execution in 1587. The death and the sort of succession of James VI to the English and Scottish thrones, that led to what's known today as the Union of the Crowns, and later the Act of Union in 1707, which created a single parliament of the United Kingdom and the Palace of Westminster. So it's at that point in the 18th century that Scotland and England really became, officially part of the same monarchy and the same system of government. It was around this time as well that we started to, industrialization and improvements in the quality of life meant that, Scottish figures were really coming to the fore, and they had the capacity to be at the forefront in advances in things like philosophy, chemistry, geology, engineering, technology, all those things. Scotland was home to some of the oldest and strongest universities in the world, and that led to this swelling of sort of what's known today as Enlightenment figures. We've pictured just one of them here. That's Adam Smith, who most Americans are very familiar with. He's regarded today as the sort of father of modern capitalism, and he recently celebrated his 300th anniversary. And his works continue to have a significant influence on modern life and modern politics and economics. If we fast forward to the modern era, a time I'm more familiar with, 1999 saw the reconvening of the Scottish Parliament for the first time in over 300 years. That came about due to a sort of upswell and public support for increased self-governance in Scotland. So the UK government granted the Scottish people the right to have a referendum on whether or not they would like their own Scottish Parliament with the powers to make some decisions about things that affected people in Scotland, like the justice system, like the healthcare system, like the education system. So in 1997, a very strong majority of the Scottish people said yes, we want to see more self-government, we want to see the return of a Scottish Parliament, and that Parliament, which is known today as Holyrood because it's seated right beside Holyrood Palace, beside the Holyrood Hills in Edinburgh, that opened officially in 1999. And the Parliament remains in operation today and has led to really significant changes in sort of life for the Scottish people. It introduced things like free university education for all people in Scotland. It introduced free prescriptions, which people in England and Wales don't have. There is, as much as we do share a lot of systems in government, the very fact that we have a parliament in Scotland with its own decision-making powers means that there are pretty significant differences in how we live our life in Scotland and the services that we have access to. However, despite a majority voting in favour of a Scottish Parliament in 1999, the same enthusiasm didn't bear out for the idea of an entirely independent Scotland. So we had an independence referendum in 2014, and in fact, a majority of Scottish voters at the time actually voted against becoming an independent nation, sort of believing that we were better and stronger as part of that United Kingdom, with some say in issues particularly close to how we live our lives, but still part of that part of the United Kingdom. So that's the sort of political standing of where we are now. And there are no immediate plans for a second referendum on Scottish independence. Can't really talk about the history of Scotland without also talking about language. So evidently, English is the main language used in Scotland today and has been since about the 18th century. But there actually, over the course of our history, been a wide variety of languages spoken in Scotland. And I'll just say a wee bit about two of the most significant. So the first of these on the left here, we have Gaelic. Now, sometimes people ask me, is it Gaelic? Is it Gaelic? I will never tell you that one is wrong, but generally Gaelic is closer to the way that the word Gaelic, the Gaelic word, is pronounced in Scots Gaelic, whereas in Irish Gaelic, they say Gaelic. So that's the slight distinction. If it's not a very helpful explanation, but that's what I tell people. If you're talking about Scottish, you say Gaelic. So Gaelic is a very ancient Celtic language, which is actually still spoken throughout Scotland, particularly in the Outer Hebrides and the islands to the northwest, which have perhaps been more isolated from the mainland and the sort of development of the English language hegemony. But there are still today something like 22,000 speakers of Gaelic in Scotland, and there's actually an ever-increasing appetite for Gaelic learning and support for the preservation of Gaelic as a government policy. Many parents now have the option to send their children to a Gaelic medium education school, which is proving incredibly popular even amongst families who, can't find any Gaelic speakers in their ancestry, just because it's recognised that growing up bilingual does wonderful things to your brain that help you in later life. And that's been a fantastic way to bring through the next generation of Gaelic speakers. And, you can say what you like about sort of the internet and what it's done to our brains and everything, but it's allowed us to have this wonderful virtual session, and it's also given people around the world more access to language learning resources. So the most famous of those would be the Duolingo, which is the phone app with the little owl who will remind you every day to practice your Gaelic. So they do have a Gaelic learning course, which is a wonderful introduction to, some of the spelling, pronunciation, get started with those early conversations. And then we also have something called Speak Gaelic, which is another online resource supported by the Scottish Government. You can take a look on YouTube, and there's sort of lessons there to take you from, saying hi, which is also said hi, it's just spelled differently, right the way through to sort of conversational Gaelic. So I'd really recommend checking those out if you have any interest. And I think it's worth pointing out this sign we've included in the slides here. So you will see this quite a lot across Scotland if you do get the chance to visit. You'll see it particularly at our train stations. A lot of places have an English language name and then a Gaelic language name, and I think that's an interesting way to sort of think about our linguistic history and sort of the origins of these places, many of which would have been Gaelic speaking at the time of their founding. And I'll also talk briefly about Scots, which is indeed another language still spoken in Scotland today. And it is actually recognised by the UK government and by the European Parliament as a regional language. So whereas Gaelic was more spoken in the Highlands and Islands, Scots really sort of developed in the lowlands and in the south and central belt. I'm going to give you a few examples in the next slide of some of our favourite Scots language words. And when it comes to Scots, some people will say, it's just an accent, it's just a dialect. But I think when you see some words like this, you start to understand that, sometimes you will require a dictionary when you're in Glasgow. So we have bra here, which you can use. It means beautiful or pretty. And you can just as equally use it for a person or as a landscape. So I could say that lassie's really braw, and that would mean I found her very attractive. We've got shuggle on here. So to shuggle is to shake. So we've got the jelly or jello on the slide here. One of my favourite Scots words is sleeket, which means sly or cunning. But I think it almost has its own sort of connotation for someone who's particularly untrustworthy would be especially sleeket. And another very useful word, it happens unfortunately quite a lot in our office, we have a fankle. So a fankle is sort of to get entangled or to get confused or to get in a bit of a state, and that can be quite literal. I could have all the wires from my computer all tangled up and I could say, oh, I've got my wires in a fankle. But I could also be really stressed in the office and be running around like a headless chicken, and Bex could say to me, Ailey, don't get in such a fankle. So also a very a useful little word. See. In terms of Scot's contribution to the international stage, we can actually lay claim to the invention or early development of some of the best loved sports around the world. So that includes football, golf, hockey, rugby, tennis. We've highlighted a few things in particular on the slide here. So in the top left, we have two lovely Highland dancers. So I'm pleased to say that Highland dance is still a very popular undertaking. I'm hesitant to call it a sport. It feels like more of an art. But yeah, Highland dancing is still very popular in Scotland and indeed around the world. We have rugby pictured there. So, people often ask me whether rugby or football is more popular in Scotland. I would say that football in general is more popular, but we're a wee bit better at rugby than we are at football. So it's always good fun to cheer on Scotland's national team at rugby. And, some say that rugby is sort of the grandfather of American football. So if you're into the NFL, perhaps give rugby a try. We also, as I say, depending on whose history you listen to, football was invented in Scotland. I'm not going to argue about that. But I will just highlight here, I've got this wonderful picture of what's known as the Tartan Army. So the Tartan Army are the sort of base of fans who follow Scotland's national football team around the world to cheer them on, no matter how good or bad they might be. They made quite a stir when they were in Germany for the Euros football tournament this summer, just because of the positivity. To tell you the truth, Scotland isn't very good at football, so when we do make it to an international tournament, we're very excited about it. We're going to celebrate. We're going to get the bagpipes out. You're going to see us. You're going to hear us. So I think, fortunately, the Scotland football fans were very good-natured and, sort of represented Scotland very positively during their time in Germany. And then finally, we have what's pictured here in the bottom right is caber tossing, but it really represents the tradition of heavy athletics and Highland Games, which is another sort of cultural export, which is almost bigger in the US than it is at home. There are Highland Games celebrated right across the US, many of them locally. Some of you might have been to the Virginia Scottish Games before. Really some incredible feats of strength that you can see there. So that's another sort of Scottish sporting export, which we're proud of. My favourite thing to talk about, food and drink. One of the sort of most iconic cultural symbols of Scotland is the haggis, and it's perhaps one of the most controversial. So to dispel any myths about what haggis may or may not be, what it is in Scotland is sort of minced sheep's offal. So the sort of inner workings of the animal, if you wish to put it that way. That's minced and it's blended with oats and spices. When people ask me what haggis tastes like, I actually just say it tastes peppery. It's like a sort of peppery mince. Traditionally, how it was prepared was that was all mixed together. It was inserted into a sheep's stomach and it was boiled. I'm pleased to say that we've kind of moved past the sheep's stomach boiling days, and most haggis puddings today are served and cooked inside a sort of synthetic casing like you would get with a sausage. Unfortunately, thanks to the FGA regulations, you can't actually import Scottish haggis to the USA. But as people that deliver Scottish events across the year, we have found some pretty good suppliers of American haggis. I think perhaps they're a bit stricter on which parts of the animal they use when they're making that mince. So I don't think it's quite as tasty as the Scottish version, but it's still pretty good, and I would encourage you to try it if you haven't had the opportunity. Also pictured here is shortbread. So obviously cultures around the world eat shortbread, but I think the Scottish version, which is crumbly and sweet and doesn't have any leavening in the dough, so no baking soda, no yeast, no baking powder. It's just you make the dough, you press it out, and it kind of bakes just as it is. Very iconically Scottish, and every Scottish person will tell you that their grandmother's shortbread is the best. So I would say that my grand's is the best, my mum's is the best. And then finally, you can't talk about Scotland without talking about Scotch, which is our biggest export to the USA, worth nearly $1 billion a year to the Scottish economy, and exports to the US alone. There are hundreds of distilleries across Scotland, sort of varying in size and scale. But I'm pleased to say that we don't only export it; we also drink it at home, and it's an important part of our national palate. As I mentioned, we organise a lot of Scottish events across the year. So I'll just say a wee bit about some of the main holidays that we celebrate in Scotland, in addition to the ones that we share, like Christmas, etc. So pictured in the top left here, I have some fireworks over Edinburgh Castle, and that represents Hogmanay, or New Year's Eve. So Hogmanay, New Year's, is a very big deal in Scotland. The word Hogmanay actually dates back to some of our pagan roots in Scotland, and some of the sort of pagan traditions have carried through to the modern era, particularly in some of the superstitions which persist today. So one thing which is very important when it comes to Scottish New Year's is this idea of first footing. So first footing is about the first person to cross the threshold of your property in the new year, and it's said to be very bad luck if a fair or red-headed person like me is the first person to cross your threshold. That means you're going to have bad luck all year. So what you want is someone tall, someone with dark hair, and it's said to be extra good luck if they're bringing a piece of coal with them to sort of keep you warm into the next year and make sure that your family is well looked after. And in many communities across Scotland, the idea of first footing, once the bells are rung and we've welcomed the new year, very common to sort of take a walk around the village, around the neighbourhood, stop any of your neighbours, but always make sure that it's not a ginger or a redhead who takes the first step. We've got a lovely portrait here of Scotland's national poet, Robert Burns, or Rabbie, as we sometimes refer to him. So Robert Burns is kind of most familiar to Americans through his poem or song, Auld Lang Syne, which we sing on Hogmanay or New Year's Eve, but that's sort of a global tradition now. But yeah, he is Scotland's national poet, which is something I'm proud that we have. We have a national poet. But he wrote hundreds of songs and poems, which form a very important part of Scottish cultural education. And he, for his time, was a real sort of free thinker and sort of challenged things which weren't being challenged at the time, such as gender equality, slavery, the rights of man, the rights of the working person. So actually, he was a pretty significant figure in the sort of societal development of Scotland. And, to speak again of sort of Scottish American connections, it's said that he was one of Abraham Lincoln's favourite poets, and he actually carried a book of Burns's works with him as he travelled. So I think that's a pretty nice collection. But we're talking about holidays. So we celebrate Burns Night, we celebrate our national bard every year on the 24th of January, which was Burns' birthday, and we celebrate that by reading his poems, singing his songs, addressing the haggis, eating the haggis, toasting the whiskey, all that good stuff. And yeah, I just think there's, in 2024, how many people can you get to celebrate a poet? I think it's a really nice thing that tradition has persisted. Up at the top right, we have a very attractive dancing couple, and what they're doing is they're Ceilidh dancing. So Ceilidh is actually the Gaelic word for party, but in English it has come to mean this style of Scottish social dancing. So I guess for an American audience, you would compare it to something like square dancing, where there are set dances, set patterns, which you're taught, and then when you're at a party, the band can say, okay, gather in a set of 8, we're going to do a Virginia Reel, and people generally know what that is. And less so in the modern era. Quite often now you have a sort of caller with the band who sort of makes sure they're talking people through dances and reminding them. And this is something you'll see at all sorts of occasions, but particularly at weddings and celebrations, where you want people to come together, get out on the dance floor. I love a wedding with the Ceilidh. It's really a lot of fun. And then you might be confused by what's happening on the bottom right. So I thought I would include this because it is Halloween season, and it's said that Halloween actually originates with Celtic cultures in Scotland and Ireland, and it comes from the tradition of Samhain, which was a pagan festival. And the tradition in Scotland is not that we carve pumpkins, because to be honest, I don't know how many pumpkins grow in Scotland, but we carve turnips or neeps, as they're known in Scots. So I have to say, I've never carved a turnip. I've also never carved a pumpkin. I think that tradition might be slightly dying out, but I don't know. I just think that there's something a bit more savoury about the turnips than there is the pumpkin. So maybe give that a go. If you haven't yet bought a pumpkin for this year, maybe get a turnip or a sweet. Continuing on with some of our sort of national iconography, pictured here is Scotland's national flower, which is the thistle. And there are a sort of variety of origin stories for how the thistle came to be Scotland's national flower. My favourite one of those, we talked a little bit about sort of Viking invasion of Scotland back in the day. So there's a very famous battle known as the Battle of Largs. So Largs is a town in Ayrshire, near where I'm from, on the west coast. And it's said that the Norse invaders sailed to Largs overnight. They sort of left their boats out in the water. They wanted to sort of surprise the Scots and sneak up on them in the night. They didn't want to see them coming. So they left the boats out in the water. They sort of crept through the water and the sands, even taking off their shoes so they didn't make any noise. But as they were sort of creeping through the brush and through the grass, one of the Vikings stepped on a thistle. And because he'd taken his shoes off, he made such a noise that he woke up everyone. in the village, and the Scots were able to rally and fight back the Viking invaders, and that's why we now celebrate the festival. I'm not sure I believe that legend, but I do enjoy it, so that's why I shared it with you guys today. Something that people are sometimes surprised about is the fact that the national animal of Scotland is in fact the unicorn. So there's probably not that many countries who have a mythical animal as their national animal, but our neighbours in Wales continue the same pattern because they have the dragon. But in Scotland, we're lucky enough to have the unicorn. Again, there's a variety of sort of origin stories for why this became our national animal, but its sort of first use officially in history was the sort of crest, which I've got on the slide here, which was used during King James VI's reign. So he had the two unicorns in chains surrounding the lion rampant. And this was used at the royal court and sort of persisted throughout history and is still visible on the crest of the United Kingdom today. I wanted to say a wee bit about family crests and tartans, and I've chosen to share my family crests and tartans with you today. So tartan is obviously the iconic pattern in weave. We've got the vertical and horizontal weaving that forms these intricate grid patterns, which are often associated with particular families. So here on this slide, you have the McKinnon hunting tartan. McKinnon's a pretty old family in Scotland, so we have quite a few different tartans. And I'm pleased to say that, people sometimes ask me, do people still wear kilts? Is that just a stereotype? I've included a picture here from my older brother Gavin's wedding, where you can see he's wearing a kilt made with the McKinnon tartan. Several of the older clans and families also have crests. So the crests they belonged to the clan chief, and those who were affiliated or who had declared their loyalty to the clan chief would also sort of bear the clan crest, the symbol of their loyalty to the chief. So I've pictured here the McKinnon clan crest. I don't particularly love it. I find the boar a wee bit ugly, but I do like the sort of motto, which translates to "Fortune favours the bold." So that's something I like to keep in mind as I pursue my life in the United States. I have mentioned a couple of Scottish cultural exports, which influence how we're perceived on the world stage. And I would say that one of the biggest influences in terms of how we are perceived internationally is how we're portrayed on screen. So throughout history, there have been some pretty iconic Scottish films. Braveheart is still one of the first things people mention to me when they find out I'm from Scotland. But many other films have been sort of produced or influenced by Scotland. So I've included a picture here of the iconic Glenfinnan Viaduct, which people know as a Harry Potter train. And again, that's something that you can go visit or even ride if you happen to visit Scotland. Local Hero, another sort of iconic Scottish film, which Americans in particular have a fondness for, telling sort of story of the connections between Scotland and the Texas oil industry. One of the biggest things in terms of raising awareness of Scotland to an American audience in recent years has been the TV series Outlander. I have to say I've never seen it, but I know the TV show and the books by Diana Gabaldon are particularly popular with American audiences and have really sort of introduced Scotland to a whole new generation of people. And there's something known as the Outlander effect, which is a spike in tourism, which is thanks to people wanting to come to Scotland and see some of the beautiful locations where the show is filmed. We do have a very modern and thriving screen sector, thanks to not only our sort of beautiful landscapes, but also our talent. So there's a new Scottish film coming out early next year called The Outrun, which I would encourage you all to see and perhaps get a new perspective on sort of Scotland's screen sector. So as I mentioned, film is one of the sectors that we're interested in, but comes to Scotland's economy, we're associated with things like agriculture, as represented by the wonderful Highland cow or coo on there. Historically, we've been associated with the oil and gas industry thanks to the oil reserves in the North Sea. But increasingly, we're moving towards renewable energy, onshore wind, offshore wind, hydrogen. We currently produce almost 98% of the electricity demand that we consume annually by renewable energy, which is something that we're very proud of. I've talked about whiskey, which is hugely important to our economy. And one final thing I'll mention is our higher education sector. We have incredible universities in Scotland which attract students from all around the world, but also produce world-leading research and works which contribute to the advancement of society and improvements in medicine, technology. So yeah, we're particularly proud of our university sector. Finally, I'll give you a wee bit more inspiration for planning your trip to Scotland. So picture in the top left, we have Craigievar Castle, which is part of the Aberdeenshire Castle Trail, which is a network of wonderful castles. I think this might be the only pink one, but they are all beautiful. And that's the sort of route that you can follow in the northeast to see some really stunning historic sites. Beneath that, I've included a little promotion for Celtic Connections, which is a music festival which takes place in Glasgow every January and February. And it's really the world's sort of premier celebration of folk and traditional music. And of particular interest to you guys might be the transatlantic sessions, which bring together traditional musicians from Scotland, Ireland, US and Canada, and sort of celebrate those shared folk roots. In the top right, we have a performer at the Edinburgh Festival. So I say Edinburgh Festival. In August, there are about 20 different festivals happening concurrently in Edinburgh. Two of the most famous of those being the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and the Edinburgh International Festival. But really in August, Edinburgh sort of explodes this festival city. In every venue, every bar, every restaurant, there are shows from every sort of artistic discipline happening. Everything from the comedian doing his first set to some of the world's best known talents. It's really an incredible time to visit. And August in Scotland is usually quite beautiful, although I can't guarantee the weather. Just below that, we have Scone Palace. So Scone Palace is known as the traditional seat of kings, and that's where the stone of Scone, or the stone of destiny, was used, and that's what the new monarch would sit upon when they were being crowned as the King or Queen of Scotland. And then finally, we have the Kelpies, which are one of our newest visitor attractions. They are, I think, 300 feet high. They're designed by sculptor Andy Scott, and they represent the iconic Clydesdale horses. They're near Falkirk, and they're really worth visiting in person. They're incredibly striking and look even more beautiful when lit up at night. Finally, because I realise I'm running out of time because I love talking about Scotland, I just wanted to mention a few ways to sort of stay connected with us if you're interested in learning more about Scotland. So I can share links to these, but we have a sort of global community for members of the Scottish diaspora where you can sign up to receive email updates from us. You can also go on there and find sort of local Scottish interest groups in your area. We're kind of spoiled for choice in the sort of DMV. Alexandria has an Alexandria Sister Cities committee, which is supports a partnership with Dundee in Scotland. There's the Virginia Scottish Games, as I mentioned. There's the Alexandria Scottish Christmas Walk, which we're very much looking forward to if you want to see some bagpipes. But please do check out the website and see if there's something that interests you. If you're interested in exploring your Scottish heritage, we have a website called Scotland's People, which has just been relaunched and makes it really easy to find things that will help you trace your ancestry, like birth certificates, death certificates, census records, etc. So that can be a real asset in terms of tracing your Scottish heritage. Bex, is there anything else I was going to mention?
The talk in November.
Oh yes, I wanted to very briefly mention for anyone with a particular interest in history, not just Scottish history, but sort of history of the US as well. The City of Alexandria is hosting a talk as part of their 275th anniversary celebrations called Scots in Servitude, which is about the sort of immigration of the Scots and the Scots-Irish and the sort of types of work and how they influence the sort of creation of the modern USA, but perhaps some of the reality behind the lives that they led when they come over here. So that's happening on the 14th of November, I think in the City Hall. In the Lyceum, sorry. So Bex and I will hopefully be attending that, but it's just an example of one of the many ways that you can sort of learn more about Scotland and get involved locally. So sorry that I talked for so long, but I hope it was interesting, and we're happy to share more information about these resources with Sheila after the fact if anyone would like them.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. We really appreciate it so much. We really learned a lot. So I'd like to give the folks at Lubber Run in person an opportunity to start off with some questions.
We have
Ashley?
we have one question.
Yeah, the website that was posted where you said we could connect, couldn't read it. Is there a link that you can read to us so we can sign up?
Sure. Let's see. So if you go onto scotland.org, you will find a link to what's called our global community, and that's where you can sign up for updates from the Scottish Government. Sheila, would it be easiest if I sort of sent you an email with some of these links that we could then share onward?
Sure, that would be great. I'd be happy to send it to the participants. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. The link's the specific link's quite long, so I don't want to read that.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. I think we may have something in the chat. Oh, no, we don't have.
Sheila, I think we have one more question.
Oh, great. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Back on one of the earlier screens of the history of Scotland, beside Mary Queen of Scots, there was a royal male. What was his name and what did he become?
Oh, so sorry, I'm going to revisit my slides to check that I'm telling you the right thing. But I think that was actually yes, that wasn't a royal. That was Adam Smith, the economist that I mentioned. That's his portrait.
Adam Smith.
No, I think Adam Smith was much younger. This was an old gentleman with a wig.
They're just
that was him.
That was him?
Yes.
In the picture beside Mary Queen of Scots, in the screen beside her.
Yep. Yeah, that's the only other man on that slide. Or the only man on that slide, sorry.
Adam Smith. Okay, thank you.
Do we have anybody on Zoom who has a question? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. I'm not seeing any. Okay, and we all set then at Lubber Run as well? Everybody's asked all their questions?
We are all set here.
Oh, here's a question on Zoom. To see that?
Wait, just kidding. We have one more question.
Oh, good. Okay.
Love it.
Both online and on Zoom and in person. We have a question. When is the best time of year to visit Scotland?
Oh, that is a very good question. I guess it depends on your interest. If you just want to sort of take in Edinburgh, Glasgow, some of the Highlands, I would say that May, June is a really lovely time.
Or autumn.
Yeah,
The fall.
Yeah, the autumn is also really lovely. It's I had the privilege of visiting New Hampshire around the fall last year, and that kind of reminded me of Scotland in terms of the foliage and everything. So autumn is a really beautiful time. As I said, if arts and culture are your thing, Edinburgh in August is pretty much the arts capital of the world. Christmas and any time's a good time. Maybe not January. I would say not January to March. Tends to be a bit cold and a bit miserable. But
And also the days are really short because it's so far north.
Yeah.
So you don't have daylight hours.
But unfortunately, we can never guarantee you the weather. But what there's a saying which is something like, if you don't like the weather in Scotland, wait 5 minutes and it'll change. So yeah.
Great. Anybody else?
Yes, one more question.
Thank you.
Was Scotland in favor of Brexit?
Was Scotland in favor of Brexit was the question.
So that's an interesting question. So for everyone, Brexit that happened in 2016, and that was a UK-wide vote on whether the United Kingdom should leave the European Union. So interestingly enough, a majority of Scottish people voted to remain in the European Union. So Brexit was actually rejected by the people of Scotland, but that the system isn't set up that way. It was, a vote across the whole of the UK, and Scotland proportionally is a pretty small part of the overall UK population. So despite a majority wanting to remain in the EU, we still left because we're part of the UK.
It's an excellent question. Anybody else?
I think we're done with questions on our end.
Okay, thank you so much, Ashley. And on Zoom, any final questions? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so I'm going to bring us to a close. I want to thank both of you, Ailey and Bex, for this has been a wonderful, wonderful program. So enlightening. We've learned a lot, and I'm ready to go to Scotland anytime now. Sounds fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on Zoom and at Run. We really appreciate it. Hope to see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to speak to you.